Hey guys, I'm currently doing an RP giveaway with 4 other YouTubers. We are giving away $100 worth of RP. If you want a chance to win, all you gotta do is click on the link below. It'll be my pinned comment. It'll also be in the description. All you gotta do is click on that link, give me as well as these other YouTubers a follow on Twitch, a follow on Twitter, and subscribe to all of our YouTube channels. These are all individual entries, so the more people that you follow and subscribe to, the more entries that you will be getting, and the higher chance that you have at winning the RP. Best of luck, and now let's get into the video. What's going on, Nasty Nation? It's Nasty, and today I'm going to be covering every single aspect of the champion brand. This guide is going to include skill order, build paths, counter picks, combos, and many more things. If there's another champion you'd like to see me cover, then feel free to let me know by dropping a comment down below, but without further ado, let's get started. Brand has been a pretty good pick for quite some time now, but the changes to the AP items in patch 8.4 put him over the top, and now he's arguably one of the strongest supports in the game. Brand is an AP mage and thus takes on a completely different role compared to the average support champion. Rather than focusing on healing, shielding, and peeling for carries, Brand turns his attention towards dishing out massive amounts of damage and carrying games by shredding through his enemies. Overall, Brand is a great champion to look to pick up because once mastered, his potential to carry games is unmatched by any of your typical support champions. Brand's passive is Blaze. Brand's abilities set his targets ablaze, which introduces additional effects when comboed a certain way, but we'll get into that in just a second. Blaze also burns his enemies for 4% of their max health for 4 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. If the maximum amount of stacks are achieved on an enemy, Blaze becomes unstable and detonates after 2 seconds, exploding and dealing damage to anyone within the explosion radius. Blaze is responsible for a large portion of the damage that Brand is capable of putting out. The percentage max health burn allows him to shred through tanky opponents, and the splash damage from the explosion is a big reason as to why Brand shines so much in team fights. On top of this, Blaze also generates mana for Brand anytime he kills an enemy marked ablaze, thus eliminating a lot of the mana issues that Brand may otherwise run into. Brand's Q is Sear. When casted, Brand throws a fireball in a straight line, damaging the first target hit. It's not by any means a powerful ability when used by itself, but when paired with its passive, it's insanely useful. If Sear hits a target who has been set ablaze, then it will stun them for 1.5 seconds. Being able to stun enemies for such a significant duration is what enables Brand to be considered a viable support. His damage alone is helpful, but without this mechanic, it's unlikely Brand could ever take on the role of support. Use this ability strictly as a way to stun and lock down opponents. It has a decent range, but even then, using it for the sake of poke is not as impactful as saving it for crowd control. Max this ability second. Brand's W is Pillar of Flame. After a brief delay, this ability summons a circular pillar of fire from the ground, dealing AoE damage to every single target inside. Pillar of Flame does an increasing amount of damage if the targets hit have been set ablaze. This ability is Brand's best tool when it comes to poking down enemies and having lane pressure. Max this ability first. Brand's E is Conflagration. This is a point-and-click ability that burns and sets targets ablaze. If used on a target who is already set ablaze, Blaze will then spread to nearby enemies. This ability is Brand's weakest ability by far, but it's still an important aspect of Brand's combos that I'll cover later on in the video. Max this ability last. Brand's R is Pyroclasm. This is another point-and-click ability that unleashes a powerful blast at his target, bouncing up to 5 times, while prioritizing champions and targets who are set ablaze. If Pyroclasm hits an enemy who has been set ablaze already, they will be slowed by a scaling amount. Brand's kit as a whole is very powerful, but this ability is without a doubt his strongest. If used properly, this ability can completely decimate enemies in teamfights. Put a point into R whenever possible. Some champions have multiple rune pages that can vary from one game to another. Brand, on the other hand, has one rune page that is ideal in every single situation. This page starts in the sorcery tree with Arcane Comet as the keystone. Unfortunately, Brand doesn't have a specific keystone that synergizes super well with him, so we take Arcane Comet because it's simply the best option available. It's not ideal for the beginning parts of the game considering Brand doesn't have any slows that he can apply to guarantee that comets land, but once he has Rylai's purchase, it's less of a problem. To finish off the sorcery tree, there's Mana Flow Band, Transcendence, and Scorch. Between Mana Flow Band and his passive, Brand doesn't really run into any mana problems. This is super beneficial because, as you'll go on to see, this allows him to prioritize full damage items rather than mana items. Transcendence is good for a similar reason, given we don't have to prioritize items with CDR, and once again we can focus on full damage items. And finally, Scorch rounds out the sorcery page nicely, given it only further increases Brand's damage output potential. For the secondary page, we have Inspiration with Stopwatch and Cosmic Insight. Stopwatch is going to give you one get out of jail free card in the early game and eventually save you 600 gold when it comes time to building Hourglass. On the other hand, Cosmic Insight is going to provide some additional CDR stats, which is just always a nice addition. Biscuit Delivery is surely a replacement possibility for Cosmic Insight because it grants extra mana, but I wouldn't recommend it unless you still manage to run into mana problems, even with the Mana Flow Band and your passive helping out. Summoner spells are a little strange when it comes to selecting them on Brand. Flash, of course, is going to be the first choice, but the second summoner spell isn't quite as straightforward. Typically, caster supports prefer to go Exhaust over Ignite, considering they ideally don't position in a way that allows them to use Ignite effectively. However, since a large portion of Brand's playstyle revolves around winning the lane phase, Ignite is in fact the best option. The only occasion I would recommend shying away from taking Ignite is if you find yourself in a lane matchup that isn't favorable, because there's no use in taking Ignite to win lane if you're not actually in a lane that's possible to win. Speaking of matchups, let's talk about when you should be picking Brand. You want to avoid picking Brand into caster supports like Janna or Nami, who can out-sustain, or dive heavy comps compiled of champions like Rengar and Kha'Zix. Caster supports are Brand's biggest counter because they can easily neglect his poke with shields and out-sustain with heals. Dive heavy comps, on the other hand, are also very frustrating to play against as Brand because his lack of mobility makes him an easy target. On the other hand, Brand is good into utility and tank supports like Taric or Thresh. These champions struggle against a lane-dominant threat like Brand because they lack the ability to out-trade him in all-ins, and they can't sustain through his poke. Brand is going to start Spell Thieves for obvious reasons and build that into Eye of the Frost. You don't actually want to initially build this item up all the way because the stats given aren't really worth the gold it costs. Later on into the game you can complete this item, but at least for the beginning of the game you should leave it as Eye of the Frost. Sorcerer's Boots will ideally be completed next as a way to aid Brand's mobility issues, as well as add a lot of extra damage from the early magic penetration. The next two items are going to be Brand's core build, and these items are going to be Liandry's Torment and Rylai's Scepter. Liandry's is not only going to add a ton of damage, but also grant a passive that allows your abilities to burn enemies. This is super beneficial because the burn allows you to have a longer window to stun targets, considering the passive burn works the same way that Brand's passive does. Rylai's, on the other hand, is just another item that only further helps Brand land his stuns, because the slow from Rylai's passive makes landing Qs much easier. The fifth item on this list is going to be Void Staff. Now there's no special reason as to why Void Staff comes next, aside from the fact that it gives Brand more magic penetration and thus more damage. The final item of the build path will differ from game to game, but ideally you want to build Death Cap. Brand prioritizes damage more than anything else, so it's really no surprise that Death Cap works well as a way to cap off the build path. Items like Zhonya's or Banshee's Veil could also work for the sixth item if in need for some more defensive stats. The lane phase is a crucial aspect of Brand's gameplay, so let's talk about that next. Brand has the potential to be an extremely annoying lane bully, given his overall damage output is perfect when it comes to chunking down enemies, shoving them out of lane, or looking to pick up kills. The main thing to focus on when playing Brand in the lane phase is going to be poking the enemy down. The easiest way to do so is to W your enemy whenever they go for a last hit on a minion. If you time it properly, you should be able to land your ability in the split second that the enemy is standing still and last hitting the minion. When doing so, you also want to try, if at all possible, to hit the caster minions at the same time. This will allow you to then follow up by using your E on the minions, which will then spread to the enemy and proc the second of 3 abilities needed to enable your passive. However, this is only the most ideal combo when it comes to poking down your enemies, while all-inning your opponents, on the other hand, requires a slightly different combo. While looking to all-in your opponent, your combo is going to be E, Q, then W. Leading with E will allow you to set the target ablaze, which then means you can follow up with Q and stun them, and then the stun will allow your W to land guaranteed. This combo does, however, require you to get into a fairly short range of your enemy, which is why it's not as ideal as poking them down from afar, but it is effective nevertheless. If you are already level 6 though and you need an increased range, you can also lead with R, then follow it up with QWE. The increased range of R in comparison to E allows you to all-in from a further distance, but it can be somewhat risky considering if you do miss your Q follow-up, then your ult will be essentially wasted. Some supports like Thresh or Blitzcrank have the ability to roam around the map and be a nuisance in other lanes. Brand, on the other hand, doesn't have that great of a roaming potential, and would prefer to carry the game through the bot lane rather than carry the game through helping other lanes. It's for that reason that roaming should not be a huge priority when playing Brand support. However, often you might simply find yourself with nothing else to do, whether that be because your ADC is freezing the lane or if your ADC is dead, so in those situations, roaming would be a good idea. When it does come to roaming, you want to use the same combo that you would use for all-ins in the lane phase, which is of course E then Q then W. Also, when doing so, you want to make sure to hold off on your Q as long as possible. You don't want to hold too long because Blaze will expire, but hold it off just long enough to make the enemy walk back and forth, trying to dodge your Q, then throw it once they have finally committed to walking a certain direction. As I have already established, Brand is an absolute menace when it comes to the lane phase, but his mid to late game is even more impressive. During this time, your sole goal as Brand support should be to group up with your team and team fight. In these fights, you ideally want to stay in the back with your ADC, keep your distance from the enemy, and burst them down with your AoE from afar. A sample combo that you could use in team fights includes RWEQ. This is going to be your most effective way of dishing out damage in team fights, because it enables AoE damage rather than single target focus. Sometimes you may find yourself getting dove on, and in those situations you will have to once again fall back on the EQW combo to peel for yourself. Throughout all this madness in teamfights though, the most important thing to keep in mind is using your R efficiently. I mentioned how opening up with R is ideal, but that's only if the enemy is grouped up. Being patient and using your R only when the enemies are grouped up is a crucial piece of playing Brand in the mid to late game, and it truly can make or break a game. I mentioned a few of these already, but all of Brand's combos include EQWR, RQWE, WEQR, RWEQ, WQRE, and QEWR. EQWR is used when looking for all-ins on single target. RQWE is used for the same purpose but has an increased range as well as a higher risk. WEQR is used when looking to trade with the enemy and use the minions to increase your damage output. RWEQ is used in teamfights as a way to put out massive amounts of AoE damage. WQRE is a way to stun enemies who are not in range to hit with E or R immediately. And finally, my personal favorite, QEWR, is used when looking to give less reaction time to enemies when all-inning them. Instead of using E first, you lead with Q then E while the Q is still in mid-air. You can also do this by leading with a Q flash, then using E for increased style points, or if you just need to close a gap. That is, however, going to complete this Brand Challenger Champion Guide. I put a lot of time, effort, and research into making this guide, so if you did find this to be helpful or if you learned something new, please consider dropping a like, commenting down below, or subscribing to help the channel grow. I've also put together some guides for Nami, Rakan, and Taric, so feel free to go check them out as well if you haven't already. Anyways, that'll do it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.